Hi everyone, Bandanner here. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to the channel. Today I thought we would have a little bit of an update on Broken Arrow because last week at the Slitherine tea time they made an announcement about an upcoming beta. So, well, I say upcoming, it's a while off yet. We'll get to that in a second, but we'll talk about that first. So if you're just here for that, you can get that out of the way, and then we'll talk about the Q&A that was done with Felix and some of the players from the beta. And some of you will have seen that already. Some of you may have seen the post that they put up on Steam, which was sort of a breakdown of that. But I thought I'll go through that list that they've made, but I'll add in other bits and pieces that Felix has said along with the answers they gave, because they're very short what they gave and don't really fully explain what Felix did. Okay, anyway, and in the background is just one of my games I recorded ages ago, and I just didn't know what to do with the footage, but there you go, I found something to do with it. So, Marco on the Slitherine stream last week for tea time, which they do on a Thursday, mentioned Broken Arrow briefly, and basically explained that they are planning to have another multiplayer beta. They're aiming for around September time, however, it could be earlier and it could be later. They're not setting anything in stone, but they're aiming for around September time for another multiplayer beta, and it will be the last one they do. And they're also hoping at some point to have a single player beta. What I should stress is that Marco doesn't say this is going to be an open beta, so it could just be a closed beta this time. I imagine they'll want to do some kind of open beta for the multiplayer though again, even if it's just for a couple of weeks. Just because obviously that's really good promotion for the game when people can stream it and things like that. The other thing he mentioned was that currently the team are working on the single player and getting all the scripting done for the campaign and everything else, and also working on various fixes, and I assume some of that will include further performance improvements. And the final thing Marco kind of mentioned was release date or release timing, and he basically said that obviously they're going to have the open beta at the end of summer and then push towards release after that, but obviously there's a lot of work still to go, especially towards, you know, that launch point. I think they're still aiming for 2024, and if you go to the first question handily of the Q&A recap on Steam, they actually say that they're aiming for release in the second half of 2024. I would add 6 months to that, so probably right at the end of the year, or maybe very early 2025. The reason I say that is because, well, they're still not sure when the beta is going to be, and the beta might be later than September is also an option, and if they're pushing the beta out that far, I'm not convinced that they're then going to drop the game immediately afterwards, because realistically, people are going to find stuff that they're going to have to fix. Kind of the point of a beta, right? So the truth is, I wouldn't be surprised if it was very early 2025 for the release. However, what do you guys think? Let me know down below. I know that, as I say, it's going to be a disappointment to a lot of people. Anyhow, on the bright side, this is kind of taking us automatically into the Q&A points that they've got on the Steam site, and also what was talked about in the live Q&A. So the first thing was about when the game was going to be released, and then the second thing was, will there be another beta, which at that time was just definitely, but no time frame. Okay, so the next point in the Q&A list here was, will there be modding tools? Felix didn't have a specific answer for modding tools. What he did say was basically that the game is in Unity. It uses standard Unity stuff, so people with the know-how should be able to add stuff to the game and do mods. What they did say, however, what Felix did say, is that they will specifically look to make sure that people can't activate or bring in the DLC using mods. And I think that's very reasonable. At the end of the day, they are a business and they need to make money and they need to sell the DLC and not let people just get it for free. So that's all sensible stuff. The next question is, will there be more factions added? And they say yes, but none have been confirmed yet here. That's not entirely true. Well, it's true that it's not confirmed, but they have mentioned the People's Liberation Army, aka the Chinese military. And that was suspected to be the next edition, so watch this space. But they do say they have lots of future plans, and when we get to one of the points further down which talks about terrain types for the maps, Felix specifically mentions places like South Korea as a battlefield because it's got mountainous regions, so I suspect from him mentioning this stuff, they've been looking at places like North and South Korea, etc, etc. Next point that's come up here is, will there be voice over IP, as in-game voice comms? And the answer is no, they are not currently planned. Felix did say that if there was a massive demand later, then they could obviously look at adding things like that after the game's release, but I wouldn't get your hopes up on that one. They're pretty confident that people can be using Discord and things like that on PC, because there's so many different things you can use to communicate. Next up, they ask how the matchmaking balancing will be done, and in Broken Arrow we'll use Glico 2 system. You can Google it, and that will be used for the matchmaking system and ranking. It should be noted that the matchmaking system will not be limited to just rank games, so you will have an ELO or whatever you want to call it overall, and outside of the ranking system you will also be matched with other players at a similar level to you through the automated system when you're just playing a non-ranked game. And this is exactly how I expected it to be. I've said this before. They can't have a system where it just randomly matches you. Otherwise, you're going to get brand new people coming in, getting absolutely decimated by really experienced players. So there will be a separation even in the normal matchmaker. Next up, there was a discussion about elevation of the maps, which I mentioned earlier when he brought up South Korea and stuff. Basically, because of where the game is right now, there isn't any mountainous regions, so it's all going to be pretty flat. There'll be more hills. They're actually adjusting some of the previous maps to add a few more hills and things. For example, Felix mentioned the highway map, the very straight one, that then had some forest at the side, and now there's some hills along that. But he did say that there will definitely be other regions where there are mountains, and they will have maps with mountains in them. But that will be for DLC in the future. Next question here was, will you add maps with a lot of open terrain? And the answer was no, because open spaces make your units very vulnerable and it'll lead to very static gameplay, and they want to keep things fast moving or reasonably fast moving and fluid, and that's how they've designed Broken Arrow, and it's why there are lots of buildings and tree lines and things like that. Next, they ask what are the 5 specs for Russia and the USA. The actual question was more of a discussion about what the specializations will include, rather than specifically what they are. Because obviously we know what some of them are, and the answer they put on Steam was just, it's still top secret. That was not the answer Felix gave. Felix basically explained that they simply don't know exactly what is going to be with what yet. So the specializations won't be realistic to real life. Obviously, they're going to try and balance it out, but they also want it to be fun. So you'll have units that are very, very old. You'll have units that are experimental or prototypes, and then you'll have everything else in between. And they'll position those in the specializations where they seem to fit and won't make the specializations super crazy powerful. But his answer was basically, it's not finalized and they're not sure yet. The next question was, will there be a standard lobby system? The answer was yes, with a caveat. So basically, the matchmaker will be the primary source of finding games, but because you need a lobby system to be able to do things like tournaments and have custom games, the lobby system will be there as well, but the focus will be on the automatic matching system. And he referenced, you know, the lobby simulator you get in some other games, like the War Game series, where you're just sat waiting for a long time, or you're getting kicked because your level is too low or too high. Plenty of my viewers will know what I'm getting at there. I think this might be a good time to mention that Felix also talked about levels. As you play games, you will gain experience, you will level up, you will get rewards for leveling up, and they're debating whether they'll also do some kind of season thing where everyone gets reset a bit down to like half the levels, and then you have to rank up again and you'll get new rewards for that. And the rewards are things like avatars and banners. The next question was a good one. So, will you be able to mix nations once more nations are added? So at the moment you can only have one nation per team in standard matches when you do the auto match, and the host decides for custom matches. We might change that when a new nation is added, but it's not decided yet. The reason is, as Felix explained it, that keeping them separate is the easiest way to balance everything. If you start allowing nations to mix, it then has to be decided who can mix with who. Is it still going to be interesting? Do you end up in a situation where it's, you know, NATO versus Pact, like other games, and you end up with very similar units on the Pact side for lots of nations, where the NATO nations get a lot of different variety because they all have their own gear. So it sounds like he kind of wants to avoid that situation. But decisions will be made on that in the future, not at this stage. So the next question was about the game mode scoring system, which obviously we had the one in the beta, which was where you just, whoever held the most points at the end won, or whoever had all the points won. And that kind of worked and it kind of didn't work. It was good and bad. It made for very long games that were sometimes just stalemated. It encouraged people to attack, but some people weren't attacking. They were just sitting and waiting and then pushing in the last few minutes and winning the game, etc, etc. Basically, that mode didn't really work. Equally, they're not really keen on the idea of doing the same as Wargame or other games with a ticket system, because that brings up other issues where you can have a very boring game where you just sat on a +1 for the entire thing. Obviously, that's a sensible way to play, but it's not a very fun way to play. So Felix has a game mode in mind and a scoring system in mind, but he won't tell us what it is because it's top secret and he doesn't want anyone else to steal it. They talk about other game modes shortly, so we'll just wait till we get to that question and just continue from here. So, next was, were there any units you thought were either underperforming or overperforming in the beta, and what are you going to do about it? So, his answer was basically a lot longer than what's provided here. First, he explained that if it's just one unit that's a problem, it's really simple to solve. They just adjust the pricing. It's more of a concern when it's a big group of units or an entire range of units regardless of price, being either too good or too bad. So one of the examples he gave, which they don't mention here, was the ATGM launcher vehicles. So the ones that are just purely an ATGM vehicle that's lightly armoured, and most of these were getting destroyed before they did the job they were supposed to do, and especially before they got off all their missiles. So what they're actually doing now is giving them half anti-infantry missiles and half anti-tank missiles, or a variation of amount there in between, but basically turning them into something that is capable of clearing buildings before you move into an area, which I think is quite sensible. It gives them another role rather than having to make them even cheaper than they already were, because they were already quite cheap, but they just couldn't really take on tanks properly. The other one they mentioned was aircraft with smart bombs, and that's kind of what they mentioned here. Felix went into a lot more detail. Basically, they've added a system of near miss for radar missiles. So basically the idea being that even if they don't get a direct hit on an enemy plane or jet, they will explode in the vicinity and do some damage. So potentially you can kill an enemy jet by just getting lots of near misses. So the reason for this was that it was really counterproductive to buy anti-air systems, the radar AA systems, because they were very soft, squishy, and died very quickly, but they were very, very expensive. So you got into a situation where it was actually better to buy lots of tanks and charge at the enemy and hope that your short-range air defense got more kills on their aircraft than you lost tanks to those aircraft. And it wasn't a very good gameplay mechanic or a good way to play the game. Hence, they're trying this system of having near misses on those missiles to kill some of the aircraft. The next question is whether they would improve infantry so they were better against tanks and things. The answer was yes, but not by a lot, because they still want tanks to be able to push on infantry. So yes, soldiers will be able to engage tanks still, and yes, they'll be able to do a bit more damage than they did. However, tanks will still outmatch infantry. The intention being a group of infantry can't stop a tank column. What they did say is that they will make it so that infantry have more health, and infantry versus infantry combat has been improved so they do more damage to each other, so that's a bit more satisfying now. And obviously if they get a bit more health, they'll last a bit longer against the tanks. Even if they can't kill it, they can retreat. So they have made adjustments to the infantry, but they don't want them to be so powerful that they can stop a tank push, because this would nullify armor decks. Obviously, I think we should stress that I don't think he's referencing ATGM launching infantry. He's more specifically talking about the infantry with RPGs and things like that. So next he actually covered something that isn't in this list on Steam, which was anti-aircraft guns, as in self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, or SPAG, whatever you want to call them. Basically, currently in the game they were missing, they were bugged, so if there was any kind of movement of the aircraft or a drone they missed, in the final game they will be more accurate, so they will be able to engage aircraft However, they won't be the best thing for killing aircraft. They will be very, very good at killing drones, however. Which leads us in nicely to drones, which was the next question. What is the intended use? And the intended use is aerial reconnaissance. There was a discussion with Felix about the fact that they get shot down very easily in the beta. However, they've changed it so that you can have low-flying ones, the same as you have low-flying aircraft, and they will not be as susceptible to anti-air, or specifically radar anti-air, where the ones that fly high will be, but you can use the ones that are flying higher as reconnaissance to maybe, you know, reveal that there is indeed a Patriot missile system or, you know, an S-300 system with radar enabled on the field and being used, and use that in conjunction with seed planes and things like that to destroy those anti-aircraft units. Game modes was obviously brought up again, and we kind of covered it, but just to say that there will be a standard mode that is secret at the moment for standard matches, but custom games will be available, and it will be possible to create or download user-made game modes created with a scenario editor and play them in multiplayer. So there will be multiple game modes available for custom games, including custom-made scenarios. So the next question was about if a teammate leaves, will there be a handicap for the other team, I think was the point. Well, the idea is that the money you get will be the same. It will just be spread out between the remaining members of the team. So if one person leaves, the 4 players that are remaining just get more cash. Originally, there was a whole thing where you might get more units, but in their game that wouldn't necessarily work, because if you've only got 2 aircraft and it gives you 2.4 aircraft instead, it still rounds it down to 2 aircraft, where they're thinking they might just give people faster respawn, so if you lose a unit, you'll be able to call that unit back in sooner. I personally think realistically there's issues with both of those systems, because even if you can call something back in quicker, it doesn't really matter if the enemy can have more of them overall. AKA, if I can field 10 tanks and you can only field 7, I'm going to win that fight, assuming everything else is equal, even if you can call yours back in sooner, because I should still have more available on the field. That said, of course, if you make it too fast to respawn, the team with the player missing would eventually overwhelm the other team, and that wouldn't be fair either. I think that one's going to be hard to balance. I don't know what you all think. So the next question was about post-launch support, DLCs, updates, things like that. DLCs will be for adding new factions, maps and campaigns, and you'll have to pay for those. Free updates would be new quality of life features and other improvements to the game, and perhaps new features that need to apply to everybody. I hope no one's confused as to why you won't be getting new factions for free. Just imagine the amount of modeling, sound work and balancing work that has to go into adding an entire new faction. That is a lot of man hours. That is costing them a lot of money. So of course they will have to recoup that cost by charging for it. Next up, will there be a spectator mode? The answer is yes. Will there be replays? Yes, but possibly after launch. It's a complex feature and they're not sure they have enough time to finish it before release. This is the type of improvement which will be part of free updates. Next question was, will it be possible to airdrop infantry transports like the BMD? And the answer will be yes, but they'll probably limit the ability to only if you also buy the infantry with it. Now, what's not on Steam is Felix does going to discuss a few other things, such as they are updating some of the long-range missiles for aircraft so that they engage better. It'll also be the case that they will engage at maximum range against low-flying aircraft, so although those low-flying aircraft are protected from ground radar anti-air, the long-range air-to-air missiles from other jets will still be able to engage them. This is just to give more reasoning to having those long-range missiles. He discusses a few other things towards the end. I'll touch on a couple of them briefly. One of them was whether they allow you to still bring in transports without any infantry, or if they limit that and make the transports cheaper, in that you will only be able to call those transports in if the infantry are either already on the field or you're bringing them in at that time with the infantry. That would allow them to make transports cheaper overall, but it would mean that you couldn't just bring in a transport for anything. He He was also asked about RNG and things like that, and misses on missiles, and basically their policy is they want you to have fun and things to hit, and you not be sat waiting to see if they hit. They don't want too much of a random number generator game. The only time that will really come into play is if a unit is panicked, and then you are making a decision. If you are sending that unit in panicked, you are deciding that you might miss that shot. I think that was the most interesting stuff to come out of the conversation at the end. There was a question about the size of the development team. They're around 15 people now, plus outsourced people like translators, voice actors, etc. And also the staff of Slitherine, which are now helping them as well. Which I assume encompasses a broad range of stuff, because obviously Slitherine have their own internal development teams as well. Not to mention obviously the marketing team and things like that. And the nice thing they leave us with at the end is, what is the most rewarding or fun thing that you've had to do while working on the game? And Felix basically said that the aspect he likes is the fact that it's a massively varied job. You never get bored, as you're always doing something different. And that was basically the end of the Q&A, so there you go. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Please, as ever, do like, share and subscribe, and we await more information on Broken Arrow and obviously the betas in the future towards the end of summer.